Every villain is a hero in their own story. But what if I told you that one of gaming's greatest antagonists was actually right all along? Imagine watching your people die of thirst while castle fountains overflow with water. Imagine being told that you were born evil, destined to destroy simply because of who you are. This is the story of Ganondorf, the Gerudo King, not as the demon lord of power, but as a child who simply wanted his people to survive. Today we're diving deep into gaming's most misunderstood villain, and I warn you, after you consider this perspective, you may never see The Legend of Zelda the same way again. The harsh winds of the Gerudo Desert carry more than just sand. They carry memories. Memories of a boy who would become a king, of a king who would become a conqueror, and of a people whose struggles would shape the destiny of Hyrule itself. Born during the desert's harshest sandstorm in a century, Ganondorf's first breaths were drawn in a world of scarcity. As the first male Gerudo in 100 years, his birth was both a blessing and a burden. The elderly women of the tribe whispered of prophecies and destinies, but young Ganondorf knew only the reality of his people's suffering. At 6 years old, he watched his closest friend collapse from dehydration during a particularly severe drought. Though she survived, the image of her lifeless form in the sand would haunt him forever. While the Hylians enjoyed the abundance of their green lands and flowing waters, his people drank rationed water and fought for every morsel of food. "Why must we live like this?" he asked his surrogate mother, the tribe's chief, one night. "The Hylians have more than they need while our children go hungry." "It is the way of things, little king," she responded, but in her eyes he saw the same question burning. In his teenage years, Ganondorf's education took him to Hyrule Castle as part of a diplomatic exchange, a tradition meant to foster understanding between the regions. Instead, it opened his eyes to the true depth of inequality between their peoples. While Gerudo women worked themselves to exhaustion mining for gems to trade, he witnessed Hylian nobles throwing lavish feasts where food was wasted in quantities that could feed his entire tribe for weeks. In the castle library, he discovered historical accounts of how the Gerudo Desert was not always the harsh wasteland it had become. Ancient texts spoke of a time when magic kept the land fertile, such as that seen in the Lanayru region in Skyward Sword's past, before the Hylians consolidated their power and their control over the Triforce. A pivotal moment came when, at 16, he attempted to negotiate for water rights during a particularly severe drought. The Hylian Council dismissed his pleas, citing traditional boundaries and established agreements. That night, as he watched a noble's fountain spray water playfully into the air, something hardened in his heart. During his time at the castle, Ganondorf discovered another bitter truth that would shape his destiny. In the restricted sections of the royal library, he found ancient scrolls speaking of a curse placed upon the Gerudo males, that they were destined to become harbingers of calamity. This revelation tormented him. Was he fighting against his fate, or merely fulfilling it? The thought that the Hylians might be treating his people poorly because of this prophecy filled him with a burning resentment. He began to see how the prophecy itself was a tool of oppression, a self-fulfilling prediction that justified the marginalization of his people. If they expected him to become a monster, perhaps becoming one was the only way to save his people. As he ascended to his role as King of the Gerudo, Ganondorf's initial attempts at diplomacy were sincere. He proposed trade agreements, requested aid during crises, and even offered Gerudo military support to Hyrule in exchange for resources. Each effort was met with polite dismissal or bureaucratic obstacles. The breaking point came during the Great Drought, when he personally witnessed 3 Gerudo children die of thirst while Hyrule Castle's moat remained full. It was then that he began to study the darker arts, seeking power not just for himself but for his people's survival. Another wound that festered in Ganondorf's heart was watching the systematic erasure of Gerudo culture. Traditional Gerudo festivals were restricted under Hylian law, deemed too dangerous or primitive. Their ancient magic practices were outlawed, while Hylian magic flourished. Even their traditional trade routes were gradually restricted, forcing them to rely more heavily on Hylian-controlled commerce. He witnessed his proud warrior women reduced to stereotypes in Hylian society, exotic dancers, thieves, or suspicious outsiders. The rich history of Gerudo astronomy, architecture, and magical arts was being lost with each passing generation, replaced by a narrative that painted them as savage desert dwellers. What the histories would later call evil, Ganondorf saw as necessity. Each step toward darkness was paved with the memories of his dying people, the children's graves in the sand, the mothers weeping over empty water jugs, the warriors growing weak from hunger while guarding Hyrule's trade routes. Yes, his pursuit of the Triforce became an obsession, but one born of witnessing decades of injustice. In his mind, the end justified the means. With the Triforce's power, he could transform the desert, ensure his people's survival, and finally right the historical wrongs that had confined the Gerudo to such a harsh existence. The incident that finally pushed Ganondorf beyond the point of no return came when a group of Gerudo women, including his beloved mentor, were imprisoned in Hyrule Castle for practicing their traditional magic rituals. Despite his diplomatic status and legal arguments, they were sentenced to death for dangerous sorcery. The same magic, when practiced by Hylian priests, was celebrated as divine gift. This double standard exposed the fundamental hypocrisy of Hylian rule. It wasn't just about resources anymore, it was about the right of his people to exist as they were, to practice their traditions, to be more than second-class citizens in their own land. The tragedy of Ganondorf lies not in his fall to darkness, but in the systematic oppression that drove him there. His story is a reminder that great villains are often born from legitimate grievances, twisted by desperation and time into something darker than their original noble intentions. In the end, Ganondorf became what Hyrule feared most, not because it was his destiny, but because he saw no other path to his people's salvation. The monster they feared was created by the very system he sought to overthrow, a dark mirror reflecting Hyrule's own failures of compassion and equality. The power he sought was never truly for himself, but for a people who had been pushed to the edges of survival. In his mind, he wasn't destroying Hyrule, he was balancing scales that had been tipped against his people for generations. That this balance would come through conquest was merely the final proof that peaceful coexistence had never truly been an option. What do you think? Did you enjoy that take? Let me know in the comments below. And if you share my passion for all things Legend of Zelda, please help me out and hit that subscribe button. I've got lots of stuff planned, including some great theories coming soon. Thanks, have a good one, and catch you next time.